So what we've done actually with this program, we've actually inserted basic reading and listening skills theories into the program as well. So this is just a sample. It's the same kind of thing as we do with all our CL programs, right? So you're going to give them some sort of skill theory that they're going over, learning a basic reading skill or a basic listening skill, whether it's skimming or scanning or note-taking, right? Or outlining a passage, something like that, right? Just basic, right? To get them better prepared for attacking those more difficult passages they've never really faced before, right? So that's going to be added into the program as well. The same thing for listening. Okay. So up here, this is actually an overview of the question types that you'll see on the TOEFL Junior test. Right? The three sections: listening comprehension, language form and meaning, as well as reading comprehension. Right? Of those 7 question types, can everyone see this in the back? Can you guys see that okay? In the back? Yeah? Okay. Of these 7 question types, where do you think students will struggle the most? Inference. Inference is a very, very, very higher level skill that most students are not familiar with how to answer an inference question. Vocabulary. Vocabulary is always one of the trickiest questions for students. Rhetorical device. Is there anything else that stands out looking at the question types? Yeah, prosody. Has anyone actually ever heard of that before? Prosody? Neither have I. I actually had to look up in the dictionary what it meant. And actually, it's interesting, but the actual meaning of the word has to deal more with intonation and the rhythmic patterns of language, right? It's usually applied to like poetry, things like that, right? But obviously we're not, the TOEFL Junior test doesn't actually ask our students to read poetry and do some sort of analysis of, you know, the rhythm of the passage. But it does deal more with the actual function of language, right? How it's actually used to ask a question.
Wouldn't that deal then similar with the idea of like what is the speaker's attitude, like what you have in the CL classes?
Yes, it's actually somewhat similar, and you guys will see, well, actually, in the actual book, it actually gives an overview of the question type and gives you several examples and exercises and things like that. But it's very similar to, like, say, a function question from IBT, where it's like wanting to know if you understand how the language is used, not what the dictionary says it means, but more so how that language is actually used, right? What it means when it's used this way versus this way, right? It'll be questions like, why does the speaker say this? Or what does the speaker mean when they say this? So the terminologies are slightly different, but they're fairly similar to what you would see on IBT. So raise your hand again if you have IBT experience. Okay, a lot of people here, right? So those of you with IBT experience, I mean, do you feel like this is going to be challenging for you to cover these question types? It's pretty, I mean, Semper, go ahead.
You know, I think it would be easy, but it might be difficult because students, you know, aren't at that high level.
Right. Right. Currently, our IBT program starts at the Eagle level and above. Right. TOEFL Junior workshop starts at the Memory Mega level going forward. It's going to be a big difference trying to teach a question type strategy to a Memory Mega student versus an Eagle student. Everyone get the sign-in sheet? So what do you think some of the challenges you might face in the classroom with dealing with these lower proficiency students in a test prep program? Attention. Is that it? Attention? What's that?
You can really participate and actually answer some of the questions we might have.
Right, participation is going to be important as well. So let's just talk about those two things for a second. Attention and participation. What can we do as instructors in the classroom to increase both attention and participation for these lower proficiency students in this relatively dry program where we're just focusing on skills and strategies for one specific test? Make it fun. Okay. So Sonia, what kind of methods might you use for making this content a little more interesting for students? Or anyone. I mean, what kind of ideas would you use in the classroom? I mean, everyone here is going to be teaching the program, so this is a real issue that people will face in the classroom.
Try to maybe use like your own personal examples. So like I find the inference questions really difficult for students sometimes, and you kind of create your own using like students. So I kind of pick someone you know, and just like kind of make fun of them. Okay, this person's really nice here. Then like write 4 inference answers.
Right. Personalized examples that are relevant to the actual students and possibly even maybe humorous for them would make a big difference. Right? What other kind of strategies might you use in the classroom? So okay, so that hopefully will take care of some of the attention, right? If we're talking about these students in the classroom, hopefully at least those students will minimally be paying attention, right? So how about participation? What can we do to kind of boost participation from the students? So you're doing answer justification, right? All right, okay, we're going to cover these questions. You're going over the first question with the students. Okay? And you're like, okay, what was the answer? They of course know the answer because you've already went through and graded it. Okay? So let's find out why. So let's look at this first incorrect answer and find out why. Dead silent. They got their coat zip up to the nose, they're all staring down. Right? What would you do? Point?
I throw out candy.
Okay. Bribery,
Yes.
perhaps. What else could you do? Because they should be practicing understanding why they missed that answer and what skills they should use to get the correct answer next time. Q&A. How so?
They probably remember what the bylaw was. So what were they talking about?
Right. So what Sonia said is that most students will probably remember the actual content, at least to a certain extent, what it was about, right? And then just use Q&A to get them a little more involved in it, right? Because it's already there, the content's already there, right? How about cold calling? Do you guys feel like that's an effective strategy in the classroom? Calling on individual students? Yeah? Sometimes. Okay. So
bring up the quiet students.
The quieter students. Okay. So if, say for example, you're cold calling a student, right? I'll use Hyojin as an example. Okay? Like Hyojin, why is A incorrect? Hyojin? Okay, let me try again. Hyojin, why is A incorrect? Do you know why? Let's look back at the content. Why do you think A might be incorrect? Okay, so you've got this situation. A student refuses to speak. What will you do?
We can break down the question into smaller parts so that it becomes like a very easy question. And if they still don't answer, we make it into like a yes or no, like very black and white.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's exactly what I was going for, is just simplify things for your students, right? So we're obviously asking them to do a justification for why this answer is incorrect. If they're not comfortable or not confident enough to do that, then ask them to at least give you the first step in the process, right? Okay, so we've got this answer that's incorrect. So can you find maybe one word in that answer that we maybe should look for back in our notes or in the reading passage, or something like that? Make it much more simpler for that student, right? Those of you who have taught IBT before, if you don't mind, can you just share, like, has anyone ever had a class that was just completely dead? Just not interactive at all? They didn't want to participate, they didn't want to do answer justification? Okay, so a few people. So in that kind of instance, like, how did you feel as an instructor?
I was
Used to it? It was just
I just
bizarre for them?
turned it, instead of, I took it from starting off with like general class questions to see who was going to be the more talkative people, turned it into cold calling, and from time to time would break it up, and then if I still didn't get any response,
Yeah.
and they just refused, at that point, I didn't really want to related to like punishment, like extra homework and such, because I know we already had enough. So for the sake of time, I usually just end up having to explain a couple of the harder questions, and then I give enough, and then I go to another question that was similar, and then I get their responses so that they had an idea where to start from.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, it's all about adjusting, right? Adjusting to your students, right? So some of us may have classes, and I hope everyone has those great classes, but literally those kids that are just every single one wants to answer every single question. You know, they're in there. They happen occasionally where you'll have an entire class like that, but more often than not, it's a mixture, right? You'll have maybe one or two students who are just really proactive, and they literally can't even stay in their seat. They want to answer the question so badly, right? But then the rest of the class is just, yeah, let him answer it, right? Don't look at me, let him. He can do it. He wants to do it, teacher. See him right there, that guy. Okay? So when we have those mixed type classes, it can be very easy for us to let those students take over, right? It is, because they want to, right? But our job is to help the entire class, not just that one student, right? So maybe what we should do is mix it up, right? Bounce it off, right? Let them answer. Of course, you don't want to ignore that student, but also acknowledge them and then move on. I know you've answered the past two questions. Let's see if someone else can. Okay, David, how much time does it typically take you to prep a lesson? Do you teach reading or listening? Reading and writing? Reading and writing. Typically, say you're doing a model test day, right? How long does it take you to prep a lesson?
Honestly?
Put you on the spot a little bit.
20, 30 minutes.
20, 30 minutes? Why?
Because I know all the question types. So just
How long have you been teaching IBT?
about a year and a half.
A year and a half. When you first started teaching IBT, how long did it take you?
6 hours.
6 hours. Why? You went from 6 hours to 30 minutes in a year and a half for prep. Why did it take 6 hours in the beginning?
I mean, in the beginning, you have to learn all the different question types, basically. So
Right.
it takes.
And when you're prepping, like the model test or answer justifications, what do you prep? Specifically, what do you prep? Say it's a 34 question, or sorry, it's 42 questions actually. Say it's 42 question set. What do you prep? All of them. All 42. And when you're prepping, what are you prepping? You just marking the right answer for all 42?
All of the justifications.
Right. That's the most important part, that justification process. Right? It's not, you're going to tell them what the right answer is. Right? That doesn't really matter. They need to know why the other answers are wrong, and then what skills can they use to correct for next time so they find that right answer. Right? That's the most difficult part, is the preparation for it. Right? Honestly, I've taught all 3 levels, or previously we used to have 3 levels. I've taught all the different IBT programs. Right? Prep is a nightmare. I mean, it's a lot. But the last thing you want to be doing is stuck in class, and the student's like, teacher, why is B wrong? And you're like, I'm not really sure. That's a good question. Let me get back to you on that one. Right? Because it's a test prep class. I mean, how would you feel if you paid for a GRE prep class, and you go in and you go, can you explain this to me? And they're like, I don't really know. I'll tell you next time. You know what I mean? It's the nature of the class. Right? You have to know basically everything. Your students should always be ready and willing and know that whatever question they throw at you related to the content, you can provide an answer, right? Confidently. Okay? All right, so we're going to start with the actual listening. We're going to go over the listening for a little while. We'll do, I'm actually going to mock some for you, and then we're going to try to break up into groups, and then I'm going to actually have you guys think about how you would approach different questions. Right? And then we'll share our ideas together as well. Okay? We're going to look at the listening section. Sorry, let's try to pull this up. It's fine. I mean, I think it needs to be better. Okay. So this is our first skill three. Okay, guys, what question type are we going to talk about today? David, what question type is it?
Main idea?
Main idea questions. Tyler, do you know what a main idea is?
Subject of the talk.
Subject of the talk. Good. Okay. So let's see. How about Melissa? If we're looking for the subject of the talk, right? Is there any place in particular that we should listen?
Beginning.
At the beginning. Thank you. Wow, I got great students today. Okay. All right. So let's try to familiarize ourselves with this question type a little bit more, right? So we know we're going to be listening to the beginning for the subject of the talk, right? But not all talks are the same. Everyone look in that first paragraph. Where will this talk be taking place? Or who will be speaking? Yeah. Where is it? School, right? It's some sort of class announcement or informal informational speech by a school staff member, right? So that gives us another hint. For those main idea questions, we know where it's going to be taking place and who's going to be speaking. Okay? All right. So let's look at those bullet points down below, those 6 bullet points. Let's look at the first one. It says, what is the subject of the announcement? Let's have Michael. Is there a key word in that question that tells us that's going to be a main idea question?
Subject.
Subject. Very good. So everyone should underline that word. Subject. Right? So when we're going through and we look at these questions, we should look for words that tell us what kind of question it is. And once we find that key word, then we know what skills we have to use as we're looking for the answer. Okay? So let's go to second bullet point. Let's see. Let's have Tracy. Do you see any key words in that second bullet point that tells you that might be a main idea question? Right, mainly. Good. So what should we do? Underline. Very good, very good. Okay? So I think everyone gets the basic idea of what to look for in the question. Right? So let's go down to strategy 1 and 2. That's very good. Melissa already answered this question, for us before. We should listen to the beginning. Right? But we actually have more information here. How long are these announcements? Usually.
5 to 65.
Thank you very much, Michael. 55 to 65 words long. So they're not that long, right? So we can make it even more specific than the beginning. Where specifically should we listen? The first sentence, the very first sentence, because you'll hear it there. It's not very long. It's a short talk. So they have to say the first sentence. Okay? So let's look at the second strategy. Kyler. Kyler is a good teacher. I've known Kyler for several years. Kyler works at the Pyeongchang branch. Kyler really likes sports, shoes, and watches. What's the subject of my talk? Kyler, how do you know?
You said his name a lot.
Right, I said his name a lot. Right? That's our second strategy. Repeated words. Right? When you hear the same word again and again. Right? Look for that. Or listen for that, rather. Okay? So, let's all turn over to the next page, page 23. We're going to go through an example. Okay? So everyone, please try your best not to look at the bottom of the page, because it actually tells you what all the answers are, right? I don't even care about the answer, because it's given to you here, right? But there were 2 strategies that we just learned. We want to apply those strategies, right? So, it says, actually everyone turn your papers over. Turn your papers over. Do not look at your paper. We're actually going to listen to this.
Chapter 1. Announcement or talk question types. Unit 1. Main idea questions. Example announcement or talk excerpt. Listen to an announcement on a school intercom.
The new school classroom edition is now complete. Because of the new classrooms available, many of your homerooms will be reassigned. The new class changes will primarily affect 7th grade students. All 7th graders should carefully read the class.
I think we just lost power. The computer just reset itself. Or shut off. Okay, that's okay. We'll do it. Okay. So we can still apply our 2 strategies that we learned, right? So let's start with the first one. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what were some things that you heard in the first sentence? Go ahead.
New classes.
New classes. Okay, what else?
New classroom edition.
New classroom addition. Okay, anybody else hear anything else in the first sentence? Class additions, new, right? So let's go to the second strategy. What repeated words did we hear? Same thing. New classroom, new class, classroom, right? So what should we look for in our answer choices? New in classroom. Good, good, good. Okay, everyone turn over. Turn your papers back over. Let's go through the answer choices. Okay, look at answer choice number 1. Or A, sorry. A. What do you see in it? Class, changes, addition. Did we find those as cues, as signals for us? Good, so let's say maybe. Maybe. Okay, let's move on. B. Does anyone see class or new or additions? Any of those key words that we were looking for? No. So do you think B is going to be a good answer? Probably not. All right, so let's X that one out. Okay, let's look at C. We have class. What else? Is that it? So, homeroom. Okay, we have class, homeroom. So we got maybe. Okay, so let's keep that as a maybe. Okay, let's look about D. Let's look at D, the assignment of new homeroom teachers. We have new, we have homeroom. Okay, what do you guys think? Yes or no? Maybe. Okay, so we've eliminated 1. We've got 3 choices left. So now let's compare those 3. All right, we've got class changes due to the addition, class meetings with homeroom teachers, the assignment of new homeroom teachers. Okay? So let's start with the bottom one, D, the assignment of new homeroom teachers. Okay? Did anyone remember hearing homeroom teachers or assignment of new homeroom teachers in the first sentence? No. So let's go ahead and X that one out. Right? Let's go on to C, class meetings with homeroom teachers. Now we just talked about this. Did we hear homeroom teachers in the first sentence? No. So we can cross that one out. Okay? Okay, finished. So that's basically, I mean, you want to take that kind of approach, right? Obviously everyone here is an adult and it takes them like 2 seconds to answer this question, right? But it's going to be very different. You'll see it. It becomes very challenging for low proficiency students to deal with these type of question types. Because they will just find that one word. They're like, teacher, they said homeroom. Teacher, homeroom. I heard it. Look, my notes, homeroom. Right? But you have to be able to still justify why that's the incorrect answer. Right? And of course, this is main idea question, which typically, hopefully most of our students can deal with these types of questions as well. Okay? So what I'd like to do is actually, we're going to break up into groups. All right. All right, so if you could, just one of you, it doesn't really matter who, just kind of explain how you would approach this question or what kind of issues you guys saw maybe coming up in the classroom when dealing with this question.
We'll probably ask the question first. What kind of question are we asking for? So what is the subject of the announcement? And James said the term lost and found we thought might be a little bit difficult. So they might recognize the words, but as a group kind of might be kind of tricky for them. So again, asking for repeated words. They heard that in the beginning. We thought they might get a little bit mixed up maybe with answer choice B. But then we said, if they come back and they give examples of they thought they might remember what kind of things, like the hats, gloves, and mittens. And then so using that, okay, those are the examples of what things that you lost.
Okay, thank you. So how would you deal with that kind of issue if they got stuck? Say students just didn't know lost and found. What kind of approach would you take? Or say they got mixed up with answer choice B. What kind of justification would you give for answer choice B?
Well, answer choice B only has the word lost. And they probably heard lost and found. So
Right.
they should look for words found as well.
Right.
So I think that's how I would try to justify it for younger students.
So how about lost and found? Anyone else think that might be an issue for students? Lost and found? Yeah, so what kind of approach would you guys take?
They may have never seen the word lost and found.
Right.
Yeah, there's a compound word, they can probably break down and understand the individual words inside, so they can infer what that actually entails.
Right, because most of our students should be familiar with those words, lost and found, but they don't think of it as an actual place. Right? They're not like, oh, I have to go to the lost and found. They're like, wait, teacher, that's like I have to go to the run and jump. That doesn't make sense, right? That connection maybe hasn't been made for them, right? So that's one thing we can do in providing them is that connection, right? Now that is a very content-specific issue, right? But I think everyone, I mean, Kylie, you guys touched on it as well. You would definitely just emphasize, the fact that lost and found was in the beginning, that kind of thing. Or you heard it in the beginning, you should look for it in your answer choices as well, right? Okay, so if we could, did any other groups have any other issues or problems they thought students might have dealing with this particular question? Or any new approaches or different approaches that you think you want to share? Yes?
So we try to think of it as if we're teaching a memory mega level student, right? So I'm assuming, as somebody mentioned earlier, I doubt anyone would actually know what lost and found is, right? But if you actually sort of approach it from the announcement perspective, meaning this is something that even the Korean students are familiar with, right? Because I'm sure their public schools actually have quote-unquote announcements. So making them sort of think about, when you have a school announcement, what do they usually talk about? It's actually highly repetitive, right? They're actually talking about some sort of change, but they're asking you to do something, right? So for me, the keywords here, and as we talked about it, this skill-specific question type, for example, you talked about earlier, how information is in the beginning, anything that's repeated. So lost and found is sort of taken care of because the word is actually repeated. Another key thing is actually, I'm assuming even a memory mega student probably knows what a please is. So if I could actually get it in their heads, usually any kind of announcement is about trying to sort of ask students to do certain thing. Very simple. And to me here, the key word actually more important than lost and found, because if we focus on lost and found, I feel like a lot of students may pick B as well. Right? So then this is, to me, there's a secondary keyword, and that's the verb. Right? What exactly do they want us to do? It says, please check blah blah, whatever it means. And then this person just going on and on. And there's a lot of words they won't know, like mins, keep track of, overflowing. I expect them not to know these words. But all they have to sort of focus on is they're asking us to do something, right? They use the word please right before, and there's a key action verb here, right? So I guess for me, possibly try to make that connection as well.
Any other issues that you might have foreseen with this particular question? Okay, so what we're actually going to do is we're going to take a short 5-minute break. We're going to come back. We'll probably do like maybe 1 or 2 more speaking.
Practice test. Number 1. Listen to a teacher talking to students.
I want to remind you that you'll have a brand new science teacher today. Her name is Mrs. Murray, and she's quite an accomplished scientist. She studied chemistry in college and worked in labs for many years before going back to school to become a science teacher. Please be polite to her today. There are so many things she can teach you.
What is the speaker mainly talking about? Number 2. Listen to a teacher talking to students.
Last night, I saw a great new movie, and I want to recommend it to everyone in class. It's called Making Home, and is about the Pilgrims coming to America. Jack Lisbon is cast as John Winthrop and does a great job. The movie shows how the Pilgrims struggled through their first winter and gives a true portrayal of their relationship with the Native Americans.
What is the main idea of the talk? Number 2.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just for the next 3 or 4 minutes, this half of the room, these 3 groups over here, if you could, focus on question number 1. And this half of the room, focus on question number 2. Okay? All right, so number 1. Over here, if we could, actually, like this team, go ahead and just have someone discuss what kind of methods they would use for this question, and then what issues they see coming up with the answer to certification. Anyone? Guys from rock, scissors, paper, board.
No one? We voted.
I know many things.
Some of the things we started with, like for justifying the answers, getting the differences, is start with the basics. Obviously, the 2 questions. What do we hear at the beginning, or rather, the best beginning is what was repeated a lot, what are words, and we figured they might hear new, hear science, hear teacher, and so based on those 3, the best answer would be A, because it's got the most keywords.
Right.
Some of the problems we thought they might have would come from B and C, because it does also have some of those other keywords.
Right.
Some of the justifications that were mentioned, for like C, is the idea of if being too polite to someone. This gentleman here to my left told us, gave us the example of if we have someone, who could someone be? It could be a new student, a new teacher, it could be the janitor, it could be anyone coming into the room.
Right.
But who was it that we actually mentioned here in this talk?
Right.
For when we came down to having different JAD, I think the general consensus was it came down to the number of keywords. In B, the only keyword that they could probably pick up was science.
Right.
Up in A, they could pick up new, science, maybe teacher if they didn't get new, because they hear teacher a lot. Beyond that, D was no keywords, no mention of teacher, no mention of science. So we got rid of that right away.
Good. Okay. Anyone else have any different approaches for question number 1? Okay, so let's move on to question number 2. Over here, if you could just pick one representative for your team and have that one representative stand up. One person from your team. And that one person stand up. Quickly.
Like stand up right now.
Yeah, stand up right now. Okay, you 3. We're going to rock, scissors, paper.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Rock, scissors, paper. Okay, again. Rock, scissors, paper. Rock, scissors, paper. Rock, scissors, paper.
Why are you looking at me?
Okay. Okay, in the back. Okay, if we can get some.
Alright, so we talked about how to sort of save time going over justifying all the answers. So we're going to not bother with A and C. They're very far from the answers. We're going to make students contrast B and D and spend more time trying to tell them why B is not the correct answer and why D is the better answer. And so because we're going to teach the students that the first sentence always has all the important information, I'll just play that one sentence, and I'll be very clear to them that D is the obvious choice. And yeah, I think that will
I'm curious, what was your reason for eliminating C immediately?
Okay.
The B and C are pretty similar.
Yeah, they do have the same words in it, but I think if they listened to the track, they heard the word coming to America, but they wouldn't have heard Native Americans. So I think they're going to be more confused with contrasting E and D. And so, once I play that first sentence over, then I'm going to ask them, so what did you hear? And they're going to probably tell me.
So you're focusing on the first sentence strategy.
Yeah,
What
because
did you
that
hear
is
first?
the rule. Then.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, anyone else? Guys, did you have a different strategy that you might have taken?
I don't know about different strategy, but our group kind of talked about C eliminating kind of quickly because somebody in our group mentioned that Native Americans that's your very end. And so because of that, like, remember the main idea is always kind of.
Can everyone hear in the back? Yeah, okay.
So like Native Americans kind of towards the end, so we always remember like main idea is always going to be the beginning of the passage or the listening all the time. So like, because they're going to remember always the last thing that they remember. So they should, like, that's kind of I guess a incentive for that. Students always like when they're done listening, you talk about go over here, they always say the last thing they just heard. So that's like the last thing they heard, they can always be like, oh, well that's not the main idea. No, that's the last thing.
Also, we were talking about like the memory level students, like self-imposed, like because it's really hard for them to like keep those things like that. The first sentence.
Right.
The
Make sure they
first 2 sentences at least.
definitely get notes on that.
Right.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, one thing in the beginning, what is the person talking recommended? The exact keyword.
Right, what his recommendation was. Right, that's at the beginning. So make sure you focus on what he's actually recommending. Okay. We're actually going to move on. Any questions about listening comprehension? Further questions about pick inference at the suggestion of one of my colleagues, because it is much more of a difficult skill theory to teach students. Right. So, but we did. I know about half of this room has IBT experience. Right, which inference is an IBT question. Right? So those of you with IBT experience, would you mind raising your hands again for me? Okay. Who in here with IBT experience feels like that they can give us a pretty decent example of what do they do for inference questions? In the back, go ahead.
I always tell my students the 2 rules of inference, that it's true but not said. And the example, I always give them a very silly example, but it's, I like banana. So that means I like what? They say, oh, you like fruit. And I say, did I say fruit? I did not say it. So that's why the inference is true.
Right. So, true, but not said. Okay? Definitely. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just going to give an example. So I like, act like I'm screaming at a kid, and I say, how do I feel?
Right.
You feel, angry, but did I say I was angry?
Right.
How did you know? Well, because I, tone, expression,
right.
The level of
Exactly. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest things. I actually use something like that in my classrooms as well. I would usually just ask 2 or 3 students to guess my age. Right? And it's funny because a lot of times they're like, teacher 12, 80, I don't know, whatever. Right? But then someone, a good 3 or 4 will get somewhere close in the proximity. Right? And I'm like, okay, let's think about this. What clues did you use to guess my age? Right? Whether it's my skin or my hair color or my hairstyle or my clothes, my height. Anything like that, right? Those are all clues that they use to make an educated guess about me. And I refer it back to them and say, hey, right, this is what we want to do when we're making an inference. We're looking for clues that we can use to make some sort of guess about these 4 answer choices, right? Which one do we think is probably the best one? So we got to find clues in there, right? Okay, but that's always a lot more difficult that's a lot easier for us because you look at me, you can see very clearly my hair is black or whatever. I don't have tons of wrinkles or whatever. I'm not like 2 foot tall. You wouldn't guess like 5 years old or something like that, right? But for these students, obviously they are relatively limited in terms of like their vocabulary and things like that. So the amount of clues that they can pick up on is significantly less, right? Because maybe their comprehension level is slightly lower, right? But we do want to reinforce that whole let's find clues. You can find some clues in there. It's just a matter of identifying them. Okay? So actually, what we're going to do is just do the same thing, group work, but we're going to focus on Example on page 56. Page 56. So you actually have answer justification there and everything. So everyone just work with your group and do the same thing. Talk about issues that may arise, how you would approach this specific question. Let's try and make it quick, 2 minutes. Then we'll discuss. 2 minutes for this question. Groups, or anyone stuck. Anyone like, I don't know how to differentiate between these two answer choices for the students. Anything?
I'll go with the topic of each paragraph first.
Okay.
So paragraph 1, topic addiction. Paragraph 2, topic science of addiction. Paragraph 3, addiction health. And then, I don't know who name, but she mentioned I'm going over things that are not mentioned.
Right.
So then we can eliminate like A, B, C. Oh, I'm sorry, A, B, D. Sorry, answer is D.
Okay. Where do you guys, thank you for that. Where do you guys feel like students might get caught? Are there any two answer choices you feel like, ooh, these, they could kind of go either way? It's going to be trickier for
B and C.
B and C? C and D? So we got, maybe there's 3 for this one. B, C, and D, right? So let's just talk about B very quickly. Now, actually one thing is I do like the way this book is set up. Whatever skills and strategy it gives you is actually relevant to every single example and question that follows it. So if you actually look back at the previous page, the logic rules, look at rule number 3, the last sentence. What's it say there? Now this, of course, would be what you cover with your students during your skill theory lecture, right? But what's rule number 3 tell you that can help us into the next question?
That's greatest most.
Right. Get rid of those extreme vocab words, right? Absolutes, right? So if we go back to this sample question, what do we see? Greatest, right? So you got a perfect justification for the skill theory that you just taught them. That only reinforces them to actually, oh, when teacher's given us our interactive skill theory lecture, just really listen. Because everything he says, I'm literally applying it on these questions, right? Okay, so how about D? Let's talk about D for a minute.
Useless is another extreme word.
Useless could be considered an extreme word, definitely, right? Completely without use. What else?
A good inference will be something that most people would agree with, and I don't think that most people would agree with.
Right. Exactly. Right. And this is where it does get tricky. Right. Even in the skill theory, I really didn't like the fact that it said it, but it says use common sense. Which, I mean, not only can you not teach, or it's difficult to teach common sense, but what is common? You know what I mean? What is common sense? Something that a group of adults can sit around and say, yeah, that should be common sense. A group of students are like, I never heard that. I never learned that. Right? So it's very different as well, and that's something you have to keep in mind. Something that we may view as common sense, students may not have really reached that point yet in their development, right? Or just, they may just have a completely different mindset as well. Yes?
I just noticed this, but if we go back to that same logic theory, they use the process of elimination. Words like best, greatest, most, terrible. But again, we have that most there.
Right. Most people in the world.
And D has most.
Right. Good. So there's a lot of different things that you could use for justification within there, a lot of clues. Like actually when I was going through and prepping this myself, one thing that I saw in the actual last sentence of the paragraph 3, it says, they feel people can spend too much time on the internet. Right? Now I would ask my students and say, do you think you study too much? And most students, I would expect probably an answer of yes. Too much homework, right? And I would say, do you think that you should not study at all? And maybe they say yes, but hopefully you have some more rational ones that are like, no, we should study some, but not too much. And I'll say, okay, so let's look at this. It says people spend too much time on the internet, right? Look at D, right? It says useless. So if it's useless, should you use it ever? Probably not. So does that match what they say about too much? Right? You can find ways to make those connections for the students, lead them to what we deem as common sense, right? Okay, any other questions about this particular sample or TOEFL Junior in general? One thing I do want to say before we actually end, and I'm sorry, I apologize for going a little bit over. The mock took a little longer than I expected. Is make sure, in the back, I'm sorry, what's your name? In the back, we spoke just a minute ago. Jessica. Okay, one thing Jessica brought up is that at her particular location, she does have very, very low proficiency students who are perhaps placed in a level that's recommended for higher proficiency students, right? But this actually applies to all. One thing I told her, be aware of who your students are and what they're capable of, right? So for those type of students, I would not focus extremely heavily on like inference questions. They can't even answer a main idea question, right? First, get them answering the simple questions, which those take up the majority of the test anyways. They'll see a lot more main idea and detailed questions than they will inference. So be aware of where your students are, what their needs are, and then focus more heavily on those needs, okay? All right, before we take off, actually, Peter, I've got to step out, but Peter's got surveys for the workshop. Okay, thank you guys.